goes by that I am not touched or inspired by a new meaning or insight that I learned from the word hineni, to be present and to make a difference. Sometimes I find myself pausing in a very intentional way after a conversation, an experience, or an exchange of ideas, and to say to myself, maybe like many of you, this was really a hineni moment. But there are other times I'm inspired by something that I read or I hear, and once again I am struck by the power of this remarkable, remarkable word. Then there are the moments that are truly transcendent and transformational, that touch our hearts in deep and very profound ways, that remind us that hineni is not just a theme, it's not just an initiative, it's not just an 18-day experience, but hineni is a sacred calling. It's a calling to acknowledge and to honor all of those within our community, all of those with special needs, with challenges, with disabilities, whether they be physical, developmental, emotional, intellectual, or simply are unable to participate in the richness of Jewish life because multiple barriers, unfortunately, still exist in attitudes and in access. On Monday afternoon, December 30th, I stood amidst 100 travelers from Temple Chai at the Ramon crater in the Negev of southern Israel. And amidst the unanticipated raindrops that were to fall upon us, we were to celebrate the bat mitzvah of Dina Bergman. As Alan and Jan held the Torah scroll with much love and with much pride, Dina went on to speak that afternoon of the challenges of her Jewish journey, of the unwillingness of her synagogue to offer a bat mitzvah at the age of 13. And now, some 37 years later, if my math is correct, 36, okay, so I exaggerated by a year. I was close. 36 years later, the remarkable opportunity to celebrate this long overdue moment with her congregation and amidst the beauty and grandeur of the Negev desert. In her Devar Torah that afternoon, Dina taught us and reminded us that Moses himself was challenged in his speech, as it is written in the book of Exodus. But Moses said to the Holy One, "Please, O God, I have never been a man of words, either in times past and now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." And the Holy One said to him, "Who gives each person speech? Who makes him deaf or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Eternal One?" And yes, as our tradition teaches us, words that are spoken from the heart enter into the heart. And so Dina's words on that day were powerful, they were instructive, and they were inspirational. And we thank her here on this night for not only being our teacher, but reminding us that there are very important and urgent works to be done. Not only to teach and not only to make aware, but most importantly to include, to allow the God-given uniqueness of every human being to find its way into the synagogue and the larger Jewish community. This month of February in the Jewish community has been designated as Jewish Disability Awareness Month. Jewish communities around the world are being called upon to raise awareness and champion inclusion of all of those with disabilities, to motivate and inspire each of us to become more empathetic and welcoming all of those with special needs and challenges, and most importantly, to practice in word and yes, indeed, the teaching of the prophets, that God's house shall be a house of prayer for all the people, where we do not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind, We are reminded that according, yes, to the U.S. Census, nearly 19% of the population in the United States, about 54 million people, live with one or more disabling conditions that impact some aspect of their daily life. And the families in America, nearly 21 million or 29% of our population have a family member that has a disability. Nearly 6.5 million students, or 13% of the student population in this country, 1 out of 8 students between the ages of 3 and 21 have identified disabilities to qualify for special education. And certainly the Jewish community and our own congregation is not exempt from these overwhelming statistics, especially, yes, as we face all of the many natural consequences of the aging process, of potential limitations and impairments. Hineni, my dear friends, Hineni is a calling. It is a calling to be present, to make a difference, a divine imperative, to create a sacred space that is free from prejudice of all kind, an inclusive community where all are welcome, a building and a facility and programming that is accessible to all peoples with apparent and not apparent disabilities, where the richness and beauty of our tradition is celebrated without barriers and without stumbling blocks, a sacred community built upon the pillars and anchors of inclusiveness, where each individual feels included, accepted, and valued. This sacred work has been inspired by a dedicated and passionate member of our congregation, by Alan Bergman and his wife, Jan. Alan has devoted his life, both professionally and personally, to this sacred undertaking. And I invite each of you to read his article in the March Highlights, in which he speaks of creating a diverse and inclusive community here at Temple High. Alan will be leading us in the creation of a Temple High Inclusion Committee, which will examine all aspects of congregational life and how we might build together a vibrant congregation and community where each of us, regardless of ability, will have the opportunity to celebrate and explore the richness of our tradition. This work, my dear friends, this work is not the mission of the rabbi. It's not the mission of the Board of Trustees, and it certainly is not limited to a specially designated month of the calendar, but rather how we integrate these teachings and values into the fabric of our congregation. And certainly on behalf of Alan, his commitment, his good work, I invite each of you this evening into this congregation and into this conversation and into this sacred undertaking. Be aware, be sensitive, be empathetic to those who surround you with special needs. On our journey, allow us to be led by the teachings of our sages. Al tistakel b'kankan el b'mashi yeshbo. Do not look at the flask, but rather look at what it contains. May the divine sparks of every human being's soul shine brightly upon all of us, creating a sacred space filled with joy and contentment and blessing.